Hey everybody, Kyle Fisher here from Hot Shot Secret. Brendon Greaves, one of our sponsored racers. He is a drifter. I know a little bit about your history. They're going to find out where you're from as soon as you start talking here. Why don't you give me a little background for those that may not know you and how you started and got things going.
The basic story is I have been drifting for about the last 18 years. The entry path for me personally was maybe I wasn't the most well-behaved younger kid and I like to have a bit of fun on the road in the wrong spot.
Don't we all?
Maybe some things didn't go super perfect there. But they did steer me in a path of there's actually things where you can go to a racetrack and you can do these things.
Were you legally steered into this path?
I mean, yeah, we'd call it. I mean, there was lawyers and judges. And kind of people,
that's the threat of being able to drive at all.
Yep. So, I mean, we did do a couple of stints over the years of a fair bit of walking and cycling around. So,
Sure.
That makes life a little bit hard as my day job. But that led me into drifting. At the time in Australia, 18 years ago, drifting honestly was the history. It basically starts in Japan. The simplest history is there was a guy who used to do circuit racing, and then when he'd win, he would do a drifting lap because he thought the drifting was fun and show off to the crowd.
All right.
And then that was a long time ago, and then that's how it started. But 18 years ago, even in Australia, we were a sport that people would look at and be like, what are these guys doing? Is this even a thing? So we kind of did that. We go to the track and I drifted like a 1980s Commodore, which probably none of these guys would know. It's a four-door, like a sedan.
Yep.
It had like an Australian engine in it called a 308, which it don't make no power. It's a V8 with no power.
Did you weld the diff?
Oh, yeah. I think every car I had from about the age of 16 had a welded diff. It was we would call it a CIG locker. There was a company called CIG that made welders and
gotcha.
So it was a CIG locker. That was basically what it was. So we started there. I used to do burnouts. I'm not sure. Burnouts have sort of started taking off in America. I do like a good burnout myself. Yeah. I've been on to do a few burnouts. So
in our drag racers, we're big in drag racing. Obviously, that's the first part of it, heat up them tires.
Yep.
But
so I do like burnouts, and my dream, I have one dream, right? I want to make it to Formula Drift Pro. That's my goal. I've been on this for a long time, and that's really where I'd like to be. I've said to a few people, if I ever win a round and that, I'm doing the biggest, I'm blowing the tires. I don't even care if they give me a ban for a week. I'm blowing the tyres off the car.
I don't blame you.
And we're going to celebrate. That's going to be, it's pretty Australian-style burnout. It's kind of an interesting burnout. So.
Well, in Australia, like, those burnout competitions there are insane.
I mean, people will basically build a pro dragster motor. Like, they usually turn them down and run them pretty fat compared to what you'd run a drag car to keep them safe. But
it's still an insane
amount of power.
They'll
build like a 540-inch cube motor with a
big blower
1471 on it, 30 pounds of boost in it. Turn the limiter off because you don't want to hear the limiter and just let the valve train take care of that.
So Australia is that's a big thing there. Like the
I would
burnouts,
say
is the drifting
Australian, part
of that? Like, can they see the connection?
So over the years, there's been a few, we would sometimes do demonstrations at stuff at burnout events, and if you took a burnout guy in your drift car, they would probably be buying a drift car.
Right.
So there's been a few guys that are pretty good at burnouts that have had a ride in a drift car and now do drifting. Because essentially, it's kind of a burnout at high speed, right?
Long burnout it's going sideways.
Yeah, it's a fast burnout. So it does get, you do it for the adrenaline.
Well, and even the big burnout competitions I've seen in Australia, I mean, in here, we got skid pads at some of these events and stuff, and they're kind of contained. But, I mean, I've seen the burnout competition where they just sit. They tie it to a pole. I mean, they're sitting there.
Yeah.
But then also, where they're sliding around on the pad a little bit, I mean, if they just open up that paddock a little bit, they're drifting.
So a lot, so we would actually sometimes for big nitro funny car meets in Australia, they would actually get us to come there and do demonstrations of drifting at nighttime, and we would actually drift the return road and then into the burnout pad. Most of the venues, so obviously drag racing gets a large amount of money, and then burnouts would be something that's a filler for a drag event in Australia. So maybe Wednesday night they would have a test and tune, and then at 8:30 they'd have a burnouts for the any kid off the street that wants to have a rip in their car. You can literally take it out there and have some fun. So I would say burnouts is honestly bigger than drifting in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that drifting hasn't quite got sorted yet is you look at drag racing or monster trucks, and it's like a venue right there. Like everyone, there's action for the whole time, pretty much, unless you like blow a motor or something. But predominantly you got a fair bit of action for a fair while. Some of the drifting can obviously, it might be some long track, and people set up on one corner.
Right.
It's kind of like rally with
when
like that.
When they come around,
It's honestly a developing sport.
Right.
Like some places in Europe have done some pretty cool stuff where they're built like in a stadium, like a football stadium. They built a drift track. New Zealand's done it as well.
I just watched one. I think I saw it on Flow Racing where it was a drift competition inside a stadium. It was a small stadium. But they were using the exit of the stadium, so they go out
and run up
and then come back in the stadium.
That was probably New Zealand potentially. Yeah. So it's pretty. It's cool. There's so many different ways. Like honestly, I can't tell you where it's going to be in 20 years.
Well, I will tell you this. I was out at California just last week for MPMC. It's a Motorsports Parts Manufacturer Council of SEMA, and they team us up with media and social influencers. This year, I would say 85% of the social influencers that I talked to there were drifters. It was like the year of the drifter. Like it's just
so a lot of people
on like huge.
Yeah, a lot of
people
are really calling at the moment. I don't know how much truth there is, and I wasn't around in the 60s, but they're calling it like the golden era of drifting.
Yeah.
It's kind of almost like how NASCAR started, to be honest.
Right.
It started with like some kind of people that like to have fun.
Yeah.
There's almost no almost no rules to our sport. Right. Like there's some rules, but like you look at my car, I pretty much built like a drag motor and put it in a drift car.
So let me ask you about that. Like what is do they have tech? Like what restrictions do you have? You have?
At the moment, there's basically no restriction on horsepower.
Okay.
No restriction on engine combination. The only real restrictions we have that they've kind of confined to would basically be you can't modify the factory suspension points on the chassis.
Okay.
So we got to keep factory cars, factory subframes.
So that makes the car selection very important.
Correct. Most of them have to be a rear-wheel drive car. There is some pretty creative people over the years that have done. There's like some pretty good guys in Corollas that have obviously spent some time modifying it. Yeah. But there's that. There has been people over the years take front shafts out of Subarus, like four-wheel drive WRXs and drift them. But as far as diffs, transmission, whatever you can dream of, you can do. Which is kind of like pretty cool. I'm sure.
Do they? So there's no class separation?
There kind of is. So that's one thing where as it's been growing,
they're trying to.
There's been a couple of different paths. Like any motorsport, you'll get like some wildcat that'll be like, see something that's like, man, this hasn't really been exploited, so let's build this car. And then they'll just go out and mop the field. It's like anything. You never think you're at the best.
Right.
Because it's always, no matter where you are, if you ever stop thinking like, oh, I'm the best, there's nowhere to go, there'll be someone that'll work harder than you.
They will humble you real quick, right?
And they'll just push past you because they're so dedicated to what they're doing. So that's kind of how the sport's been evolving. Me and a good friend in Australia, we actually went to TAFE together, or like, I'm an electrician by trade, it's my day job. And we went to school together for that. And then to get the last 15 years, me and my friend Adam have actually just been like one-upping each other.
Nice.
Like I'd build one car.
It's good to have that competition.
Yeah, he'd build something a little bit cooler. And then it was like, and now I've ended up with something pretty wild. And then he's got a sick car as well. So we kind of pushed, and there was a lot of other people at the time doing similar things, but that's where the progression's gone. But essentially no rules. Like realistically, there's no rules at the moment.
So let's talk about your car. The what?
Tire rule. That would be... Yeah, so the tyres we can put on them.
Oh, tire.
I got you. And I spell it T-Y-R-E.
So, what's the tire? What's the tire rule?
So that's kind of the only classification that's really happened. So they might limit you on like a 235 radial class.
Okay.
So it has to be like a street tyre and 235. And then everything else is unlimited. So but you can only it's kind of like...
What kind of tires are you running in an unlimited class?
So some of those guys will run like 325, like super soft... Like the cars will pull wheelies out of the corner,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you're actually, and that's kind of...
So they're like drag radials?
So they call them a semi-slick, but it's like a soft treadwear road tire. You're always basically chasing grip. It's exactly like drag racing, really. Right. Like it's a good combination of maybe circle track, dirt, drag racing.
Well, I will say this, and what I find and I'm not super knowledgeable on this. That's why I'm so intrigued by this sport. Is I know drag racing well, and obviously drag racing, you always want to be hooking. You know,
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
you know, spinning ain't winning, as
Yep.
they say.
Yep.
But you guys are spinning, but you still like I've seen and I've heard, you know, in some interviews about, you know, as you're drifting to the side and you're getting close to the wall, you know your car well enough to get the grip to the ground before you catch that wall.
Yeah,
So it's a balance of
there's a lot
the
of
spin
there's
and
a
the
lot
grip.
which is kind of why you end up chasing power,
Right.
Because you put more grip into it, and then you kind of want to be able to overpower it
And
if
blow
you
through
need
the
to.
grip when you need to, right?
So, and there's the other thing is there's a lot of different driving styles. Like, I would say I'm quite aggressive driving style.
Okay, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
I was watching one of your videos, and you said something that like blew my mind because my ignorant mind of drifting, I'm always thinking of the handbrake.
Yep.
That's
Yep,
the big
yep.
thing is, you know, the handbrake and stuff. And I swear in one of your videos you said like you barely touch it.
Yeah. So like I'm someone
crazy.
that's not. Yeah. It's not really.
So you
my
literally
style.
are controlling that with
So-
power,
Yeah, and
blowing through the
so
grip and
you know when you're in the snow, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of go around the corner, and it's like you're a little bit faster than what you should be.
right,
Well, that's the weight of the car. You're drifting.
right.
Right. So we're literally doing that at a faster speed. So
What
literally,
kind of
you
wheel
could get-
speed are you getting?
honestly, that's actually a very important thing for drifting. So
Okay.
the car in particular has a winter's quick change. So
Right.
it's kind of like a sprint car diff, but IRS. Well, not kind of. It actually is like a sprint car diff, but IRS. So we would set our car up from anywhere between 80 to 140 mile an hour wheel speed, depending on the track you're running.
And what's your ground speed?
So ground speed would be between 50 and 110.
Right.
Is a fine line between having too much wheel speed and being slow,
Right.
and having not enough wheel speed and the car being really
Right.
almost impossible to drift if you're right on the edge of no wheel speed. So it's a balancing act, which then comes into tire and everything else.
Speaking of balancing act, when you're out there in tandem with another driver
Yep.
and you put on these shows that just amaze me how close you get and everything. I'm sure you got, like you said, you got your one buddy who you've been
Yep.
competitive with. So if you two are out there, I'm sure you're real comfortable, know where he's going,
Yeah,
know
if
where.
you've done a lot of laps with someone, you usually know their style, so you can kind of
So
predict.
are you ever out there with somebody that you've never run with before, and you got to kind of feel it out? As
I mean, I don't know if you've seen my car at the end of last season. There's a lot of dents on that.
I was gonna say,
So there's
little body
usually a
damage.
few times where you're like, "Whoa, that didn't work out."
Right.
So in competition, especially me coming to America here, I have some of these tracks we turn up to. I've never even seen it before.
Oh, right.
So I'm getting there. I'm trying to learn the track, and then even honestly, America has a different driving style to Australia. So like you got so many things you're thinking about, and then you go into competition, and then you probably most of the time here, honestly, I drive against someone I've never driven before. So
And then one thing that's unique about you, it clicked in my brain once when I was watching a video, a side-by-side drift with another driver.
Yep.
And you're like face-to-face with them because you're right-hand drive.
it's kind of cool.
That's so cool. That's so cool, man. It's like, just looking
it
right
spins,
next to
so many of the starters and people at the events, they'll be like, kind of, you'll be pull up to the start line and they'll kind of like look where the driver
There's
should
no
be.
driver.
And they're kind of like, and you can put your hand out the window, So that's kind of interesting. It definitely right-hand drive car definitely spins. I honestly just feel, I just bought a C6 recently
I saw
to
that.
do some seat time in. I mean, C6s are kind of cool. It's something, I mean, maybe in America here people don't think they're that cool, but it would be a supercar in Australia.
Yeah.
Like, it would be, if you had a C6 in Australia, it would definitely be like, whoa.
I saw the new vet. How's that build coming along?
Yeah, we're actually honestly pretty slow right at the moment.
Yeah.
I got the other car blown apart, and we're just putting that thing. My main goal is to get that back together. The Corvette's going to be pretty simple, so it's not really going to take a lot of time.
So let's talk about your other car, the BMW.
Yep.
LS swapped.
Yep. So I've been an LS guy, honestly, since that 308 blew up, to be honest with you. I was like, I've always kind of paid my own bills with some good support from companies, and there's a lot of support for an LS out there.
Is an LS a popular engine in Australia?
They're so we had
pick them up in junkyards here. It's like
so they're not as easy to get as what they are here, right?
But they're still accessible.
But they're still accessible.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, Australia doesn't build any cars anymore.
Right.
Like it's not even a thing. So everything's imported. So yes, they're still accessible, and you could also buy it. There's few people importing them from America into Australia now as well.
So give us some specs on the Beamer.
Okay, so we can start with the motor. So I actually I had a really nice motor in it, and I broke it last year. I dropped a valve. Like really, the valve trains do get pretty hammered in drifting. To be honest, once you're kind of committed to a corner, you can't really get off the accelerator in most scenarios, so you kind of just stay in it. So there might be a bit of limiter sometimes, and then you go to LS Fest and it's nighttime and there's a big crowd, so you need some flames, so a bit more limiter,
Speaking of the part of the video at LS Fest, it's one thing when you're full throttle going around the track. When you're just coming off the track after your lap and your fireballs, it was good. It's cool.
I mean, at the end of the day, honestly, drifting's just a show.
Yeah.
You judge, so you could think you did the best thing in the whole entire world, and if they don't like it, you're still going home.
So how is that? Like, is there a feeling of like, I should have won that, or it's like it's the sport? It's just
There's been many times where I was like, I should have won that.
Right.
Obviously, I didn't, or I didn't deserve it, or whatever the thing was. But as I've been in it for longer and longer, you just kind of realize that you're doing it because you love. I do it because I love it. Like that's
you're putting on a show. And if like they pick you, it's a bonus.
It's almost like it's very similar to monster trucks.
Right. Yeah.
Like the crowd, as long as, and I even say to people like when we're driving, I'm like, dude, if the crowd didn't think that was cool, it's not cool.
Right.
Like really the crowd and sponsors, and that's the only way I can physically race is by having all those people help me.
Yeah.
Like I need people to think it's cool. I need sponsors and companies to be involved with what I do, or it just doesn't happen for
anyone. Takes a team.
It does.
And to that point, with us, we've always been a company that we originally weren't into motorsports. We came up on the diesel side, over the road trucking stuff, and kind of got dragged into it from a passion we have of making high performance products and proving them, and then we're taking them to the dyno, and then we met Firepunk Diesel just using some dyno time. Which you turned out to be a customer of 5 years ago.
One of the first people I ever met.
Right.
I was literally in Ohio, and I was like, "Hey, I need to sort something out on my truck," and did some Googling, and man, Firepunk's close. Looks like they got some cool stuff, and they hooked me up, man. So
it's a small world, and they dragged us really into the motorsport stuff because they said,
So I got them to thank.
There you go. You planted that seed, and but we're also not a $1 billion company that has stadiums named after us. You know,
not yet.
So not yet. There you go. So what we always try to do, and I remember talking with you the first time we talked, and it's we try to work with the right people, the right people to partner with, and we love data and testing and really pushing our products to the limits. And I remember the first conversation I had with you, I was like, I like this guy. He's a data guy.
My car in particular, I worked with someone in Australia, a good friend. He is a Motec dealer there. Oh, nice. So that was kind of like when I first spoke to Trey.
So that's where you're getting all your
So the Motec system, it's a sick system, to be honest with you.
It's taking over the diesel drag racing. Yeah.
I mean, they do some pretty nice diesel packages, and then there's some super smart people in America that build their own package that you can use the hardware for their software. So So Motec was that was kind of one thing I've had. I do everything myself predominantly, and so I kind of know how everything works. And then when I'm at the track, one thing I've learned over the years is if you don't want to be let down, just be able to do it yourself.
All right.
Because there's only one person to blame then. And
there's only one person you can always count on.
Yeah. I'm pretty committed to making it happen, Right. So I'll just keep pushing. So that's the electric pack. The whole electrical package in the car is Motec.
Nice.
So front to rear, twin PDMs, M150 ECU, and it's got a Motec dash, which is actually set up as a logger. So
oh, nice.
That's basically
so you're data logging everything right there.
Yeah, so I do it through the dash in that particular car.
And you just pull it to a laptop?
Yeah, so all the PDM functions. So one thing that's kind of like drag racing, with drifting, you literally have one lap to make it count.
Right.
So you can't be like, on the next lap, I'll just fix up that shitty mistake. So
gotta nail it.
That's kind of like why Hot Shots and all the companies I work with are so important to what I do, because I can't afford to be like, well, we kind of blew up on that one, so we'll fix it on the next one. There is no next one.
It's
you could travel across the whole country, and if some product you have didn't work, you just put it back in the trailer and a long drive home,
Yep.
So it's very important that one hit you get has to work. So you kind of work at having the best you can at everything.
I don't know if you know much about truck and tractor pulling. That's another sport that we're in. I really respect it for that particular reason. Before I got into the sport, I didn't know that there really isn't any. They don't do any practice pulls or nothing. These guys drive across the country. They set their pits up, fire their tractors and trucks up and stuff, and wait a few days, and then hook once, and however far you pull that sled, that's a wrap. And then they drive all the way back across the country, So it's like one shot at it,
if you have like one electrical thing that you cheaped out on and the wire comes off.
That's a long wasted trip.
Yeah. And to get to these events, some of these things you could travel for 2 days to get to where you want to be.
Right. But speaking of that, in Australia, you told me it's even cheaper to go to Japan and
So we would go racing in Japan instead of a local to us. Well, when I say local, I don't
Australian local.
Yeah,
it's pretty far.
You look at a map and Australia's like this big, and then I live just here, and then it might take me like 2.5 days to get over here to go racing. So. Yeah, when people are like, oh man, that track's 10 hours away in the US, I'm like, load me up, baby. That's down the road. Right. Anything that's 10 hours, that's down the road.
That's easy.
Yeah, we can if we can get it done in 1 day, that's an easy drive, So back to the engine. This new engine was actually built by a school down in Houston called Samtech. So School of Automotive Machinists.
Yep.
I was lucky enough to meet them through someone I met at LS Fest called Hooper's Heads. So Hooper's Heads is a pretty small LS head business in Texas. We got on sweet, and he was like, man, I seen you driving out there. He's like, I got to get a set of heads on that car. And I'm like, why? And he's like, if I can make a set of heads that's going to hold together on your car, dude, I'm good for most people.
Right.
So he was like, it sounds like you're
we
on
get that. That's exactly our, like how we do the motorsport
He was
stuff.
like, man, you're going to push it. Because one of the first questions Trey said to me, I was like, well, I asked him, I was like, hey, I get my oil pretty hot, man. Like, pretty hot. And he's like, how's hot's pretty hot? And I was like, I mean, I'll see 270 sometimes on the screen. And he's like, yeah, that's hot, but we're good. We got you covered.
We got you.
He's like, it won't break down. And I'm like, perfect. I was like, I've run a few oils over the years, and I've had a few issues with different things. And I know oil temp's not good. It's not good for anything.
What are you turning that engine at?
The engine I broke that I dropped the valve in, we actually turned it, that was 8,800. So it was like 430 cubes, 8,800 RPM.
Just screaming.
So that was probably me getting too carried away, to be honest with you. For what, like, it sounded cool.
That's when you hit 270 degrees.
I would hit that on a regular occasion. So
I remember one of the first things you reported back to us when you were testing our oil. You did have a drop in temperature, right?
We literally dropped 10 degrees. Like, our overall running temp. Obviously, I'm not sitting at 270. It might be like the end of 2 back-to-back runs, I might see 270. Right. It does have a big cooler and fan on it, but we literally dropped 10 degrees straight off the, like magic.
Just off an oil
Just
change.
straight off, just literally. And one cool thing we did an oil change of what I had in it, and then we did the new oil that you guys had supplied me. So that's the magic, dude.
This is the FR3. This is the friction reducer in the race oil. We even got racing oil here. So it's part of that. So
magic stuff, man. That's what you need.
It's good stuff.
So that literally dropped 10 degrees out, and that actually then helped the cooling system as well.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like kind of a win-win, because that was an aluminum block. So obviously the better you can pull the oil temp down, the better the coolant temp, and everything just works out.
And speaking of cooling system, this is like something that's, I had this conversation a lot with some drivers over this past week too. What's unique to us, and the reason why the racing oil we make is the greatest racing oil on the planet, and I'll stand behind that against any oil out there. We couldn't make this if we were a racing oil company.
Yep.
I feel bad for racing oil companies, because they've got to sell product. You know, it costs so much to build an oil like this that it's really it's a playground for our R&D to show off
how good it can be.
Right, our guys that are out there using it are love it. And it's not for everybody. It's not the cheapest oil in the world, but if somebody really wants to protect a really good investment, we threw the kitchen sink at this oil, And
I mean, in the scheme of what most racers are doing, like I said, because we kind of discussed what I had in it, and he's like, oh, that's not cheap. And I'm like, I mean, I'm not really about the cheapest. I really just want something that's going to last and something that's going to be good. And then when we sort of spoke, I was like, I want a brand that's not just, going to give me $200,000 to do what I need to do.
Because we ain't doing that.
Yeah, because I need to be like sold that I think the product's actually good. Like if I want to be an ambassador for that company,
You got to believe
I
in it.
want to believe in it myself.
Sure.
So when I'm talking to someone, if I'm genuine, you know,
Well, and that's why I knew you were a good one,
Yeah.
because right away you really wanted to learn the science behind it. You were very inquisitive and stuff, and vice versa. We want to learn too. It's kind of like we launched a line of RV products a couple years ago, and so sometimes people ask me like, well, I see that you got a gas additive and you got a diesel additive, and I either have a gas or diesel RV. Can I use that in my RV? Why would you have an RV? And the answer is they could use our regular products, but we take this type of stuff back into the lab, into the guys, Aaron, the guys you're just talking with.
Got some crazy numbers for me and stuff I don't understand.
Yeah, exactly. And we tell them, and so, when they're formulating this stuff, if you knew that the person that was going to be using this was using it in an RV, would you change anything to it? And they're like, well, yeah, RVs stop and go a lot, so probably some more stabilizers, some water dispersant, and so forth. So we use that same approach when we look at these motorsports. And here's an eye opener to me. So first we got into drag racing and learned a lot from those guys. And these are heavy horsepower loads that are hitting hard. Like we worry about gear oil and holding all this stuff together, versus the truck and tractor pulling is a little bit different. They're high horsepower, just torque. They just want to pull it through a brick wall. And then when I was talking to you, like my thought of it is, okay, I know these guys have it pegged for a good minute straight. So, I mean, drag race is a few seconds, pulls maybe a little bit longer, but to have it pinned for a minute straight is the ultimate torture test on an engine. So for us, we're like, ooh, that's an ultimate torture test on our oil,
Yeah, so we live almost some of the time, some of these events, I know it's not good, I probably shouldn't say it, but we don't even get anything up to temp. Like, I won't even be at running temperature really. Sometimes when you pull out on the track, like you've done your best to warm it up, but it might be at 110 degrees and you'll just get into it, which is obviously not great for anything, but it is what it is. And I'm sure some of the tractor pullings, I don't know if they get that to full running temp before they get into it. I'm sure they might.
They usually, and those things are just completely different builds. I can't believe those things even start. Here's the one thing I remember kind of blowing my mind. You were telling me that you have a lot of the heat issues because you're like, well, we don't get any air through the front. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, so predominantly
you're going sidewards. Oh, so there's no air coming right through the radiator in the front of the grill or anything.
So the radiator's actually in the back of my car.
Right.
So
and you are you funneling air to it?
Yeah. So the reason why it's back there is mainly for weight, to be honest with you.
Gotcha.
So we're trying to get as much grip as we can out of these cars.
Put some weight on the rear axle.
So my car's kind of a 50-50 weight balance front to rear.
Interesting.
So that's kind of why it ended up back there. But in the front is probably a little bit better, to be honest, because like even if you're doing a cool down lap, you could get some airflow. But predominantly the fans are what's doing all the cooling in these drift cars.
Right.
So you got some pretty hefty fans pulling a bunch of air. You're ducting it in there. And that's another like science that I'll get into. But ducting air to keep things cool is a whole interesting thing to make that work. So,
and speaking of product, you're gonna have to remind me of the data on this. But we put some of our brand new racing top lube in your hands.
So that was something interesting.
And you came up with a testing for that we hadn't even thought about.
I actually honestly have always run some sort of lube in Australia in my fuel because we run ethanol. It's pretty dry. It really, fuel pumps and injectors are not the biggest fan of straight ethanol or methanol. It's not really the greatest for anything. And if I park my car up over winter, I'll usually put pump gas in it, to be honest. So you guys came up with the formula. Me and Aaron spoke about it. We got some in the car, put it in there. And the first notice, so I had just plain pump E85 in the car. We put that in, and the first thing I noticed, because I like data, I love data, to be honest. It's like, it's
why we love
it's something that doesn't lie, right?
Exactly.
Like you can't fake it. Like it is what it is. That number is what it is. Whether you like it or not, that's what's happening. So I monitor all my fuel pumps pretty closely. So one thing that's nice with the Motec is I can monitor everything. I have all my fuel pumps logging, the whole run I'll have logging, because if you do lose something, you want to be able to look back and be like, man, what was it? Because the worst thing is like, the engine shut off. I don't know why.
Right.
So you can go back there and look at the fuel pumps. So that particular car at the moment, well, I am changing the fuel system, but when we tested, I had 3 Walbro pumps. So I have a fuel cell, then I have a pickup pump that goes into a pot, and there's a pot inside my fuel cell. So the pickup from the bottom fills the pot, and then there's 2 pumps in the pot. The pickup pump is not under much pressure. It's just a fill pump. So that particular pump there, I noticed 0.5 amp. So the current draw from the previous event on the same fuel was 0.5 amp less. I was like, that's kind of weird. And the one thing I do notice is as the pumps wear, which is kind of my maintenance program, as they wear more, I'll usually see more current draw.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure, not the smartest person in the world, but 99% sure that's bearings and everything starting to like, essentially it's so dry, there's no lubricant in the fuel. Everything's starting to seize up. So that's usually what I watch for. So I was watching that. And then my pressure pumps, I was like, man, these things are 2 amps down each pump. One thing nice about Motec is you can basically do, I'm going to do metric because I'm in metric, but milliliters per minute of fuel usage. So you watch that and a lot of things are controlled from that. So my second pump stage from that milliliters. So I'll drive around on one pump, and then basically when the car starts coming on to boost, that's about the threshold, the other pump would come on. And I noticed both pumps had dropped 2 amps, and I was like, it's kind of weird, and then I was like, man, it's after we put the lubricant in. So we did it for a couple of events, and then, I reached out. I was like, hey, it's one thing we noticed is...
That's very cool.
And it's literally the only thing that's changed.
And again, the only thing that's lubricating that fuel system is the fuel itself.
Yep.
So with the dry ethanol, it's cool to see a before after of, and basically what that's saying is that pump is not working as hard. It's working less hard to pump the same amount of fuel.
Yeah, so the fuel volume and everything's hasn't changed. Everything's as
Keeps
it
the
should
fuel
be.
the same. You still
Fuel map's identical. It didn't change a single thing. It just simply
reduce
dropped
the draw on the.
Yeah, it just reduced the draw.
We didn't even think about that's a great test for fuel lubricity. You know,
it was sweet,
in application. Man. I thought it was cool. You just said too about your fuel setup too. I'm guessing that draw into is because you're probably sloshing that fuel around all the time. So you need a
So in the early days, so there's so many smart people out there, man. Someone designed, it's a normal tank with like the 20 odd bolts on top of it. So it's like a tank that's been around, fuel safe maker. There's a bunch of people make them. That tank's been around for probably 100 years of racing. Right. But this particular solution, I mean, I'm sure other people use it now, but it's very popular in drifting.
Right.
Yep. So in the older,
if it works,
in the older days, there would usually that tank was a thing, but it would be like somewhere remote mounted. Right. So then you'd have more plumbing and more wiring and more things to go wrong.
Right.
So whereas everything's kind of built into the one drop in. Yeah. There's a couple of companies that make it.
How there's specialized products like that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's one thing like that people kind of don't appreciate. There's so much of everything going on, dude, that there's like companies that can literally you can specify and build something that's an amazing product to specialize in something because there's so many people that are going to buy it.
Yep. So 2024.
Yep.
What's your plans for this year? What's on the outlook?
So this is like year 3 of being here, and on first year moving here was kind of rough. Last year we did a lot better. This year the main aim is honestly 20 events.
Oof.
I really want to do 20 events.
That's
in the
a busy year.
Yeah, so like we're not going to be super, I'm not going to go to California and then to Florida and then back to the East Coast. It's going to be
those are close though. Remember, you're from Australia, so
they are close, but we're not going to be that ambitious for the year. But there's quite a few local events. So one thing I like to get to is I run a kind of pro-ish car, you would call it, but I do like to drive with everyone.
Sure.
I want to be involved from the grassroots, which is a very big part of motorsport, all the way through the pro end side of it. So I want to be involved.
You started it. You've made that whole walk.
Yeah, so, that's me. I was driving in a car that was basically a shitbox.
A car that would make Trey Sykes proud.
Yeah, that's what I'm about, dude. So that's where I started, dude. So I love driving with those guys. You can either, some people you can even see and help. You might be able to help someone that, gives them that, man, this is sweet. So
everybody needs a help along at some point.
Dude, even myself sometimes, this last year I got one podium, one first place podium, and honestly, I needed that.
Right.
So I was like, yeah, I've still got it. So 20 events is the aim. I love LS Fest. So LS Fest east, like Bowling Green, dude. That is like, the people out there are cool, man. That's a good event. So that's like on my list every year, no matter what.
I'll tell you what, some breaking news.
Yep.
I don't even know if it's official yet, and if I can say it, we're coming to LS Fest this year.
Hell yeah.
So you motivated us.
Dude, it's
so we're coming.
The people out there are cool, man. I mean, I kind of like Southern people, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think like the further south you go, you get some cool people, man.
Yep.
So yeah, that's my like one. That's my one event. Probably going to do LS Fest down in Houston as well.
Okay.
So Sam Tech, the people that built the engine, and Hoopers are both down there. So I'd like to go see them and support them, and pop in and see how they're going. Then there's some events called Grid Life, which is quite. Yep. It's like a festival party atmosphere. It's a good exposure event for the car. It's a lot of fun. You can take people for rides that have never been in drift cars before.
That's very cool.
So that's like a real. Man, that's a big event. Like they get some people to those events, man. So the first one is actually in South Carolina. So we'll be heading down there for that one. That's the first one of the year. So they have a few series, and their biggest one would be in Michigan, which is nice for me. It's super close to home, and it's their biggest one as well.
Nice.
That is like, that event's busy.
Nice.
So there's a couple of Grid Lives we're going to hit. Then there's a series up in North Dakota, and I have some friends up there.
Huh.
It's like a licensing Formula Drift shootout series, so it's like a decent sort of competition driving. So they've got 4 rounds up there, so we're going to hit that. Cool. And then everything else is going to be from Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. I'm going to keep in that little circle there.
Yep.
Between those, there's a lot of that's one thing that's cool about America, dude. Like tractor pulling, drag racing.
There's a lot going on.
If you're like dedicated to your sport and you can make it happen, you could drive once or twice a week at least if you wanted to.
And I believe drifting is probably the one that's on the most fire right now. And like I said, just from my meetings last week, not only did I meet a lot of driver influencer people, but there's, which I should pass along some of the info I'll give you after this, but there's a few new like series that these guys are putting together that are looking for support on. So like the industry is now offering more places for drifting and stuff.
Yeah, honestly, the last 5 years has been exponentially growing. Pretty much everyone's a privateer apart from there's probably a handful of people backed by, Ford or Toyota or someone, but predominantly everyone's got a day job.
Right.
Yeah, everyone's still working for them. Like,
got to pay for these car parts.
Yeah, there's plenty of car parts to get broken and paid for. So, it's cool, man. It's definitely growing, and I think I'm in the best place in the world to make it happen.
I agree.
Pretty much why we're here.
And you got a busy year scheduled. So
yeah, we got a busy year, so it's ambitious. But between the Corvette and the E92, I think I should be in good steads to get that done.
Nice. Well, we'll be there to support you.
Appreciate it.
We really appreciate this partnership. I love you coming out of the gate with new data for us and new ways to test our products, and most importantly, we appreciate our products getting the crap beaten out of them like you do, and it makes the everyday guy know that when he puts it in his daily driver,
you can be confident it's
tested.
This I know before, like when I first picked up the sponsorship, a few of my friends were like, "Man, I actually use FR3 all the time when I service my car.
Nice,
I get better fuel mileage."
Yep, absolutely.
So I was like, "Oh, that's sweet." And then obviously couple of times, you guys are in AutoZone and O'Reilly's and everywhere, so it's available.
Well, it's out there. It's out there, and we appreciate guys like you that help get our name out more. And I'm excited to get out to LS Fest this year. And
you'll enjoy it.
We're going to bring the whole Hot Shots, crap show out there, and vendor booth and everything. So look forward to supporting you there, and good luck to you this year, bro. And
thank you.
Thanks for stopping by. And
anytime.
We'll catch you next time when a random racer stops by the place. So
hell yeah.
Thanks, Brendon.
Guys. Bye.